Welcome to the Lady Landlords podcast, where we empower women to gain financial independence through real estate investing. I'm your host, Becky Nova, founder of Lady Landlords. If you're ready to buy, manage, and grow your real estate portfolio, then let's get started. Welcome back to this week's episode of the Lady Landlords podcast. I am your host, founder of Lady Landlords, Becky Nova. And today we have a very special guest. We have Tony Robinson, who's one of the co-hosts of the Bigger Pockets Real Estate Rookie podcast on today. I was actually on their podcast about a year ago. So I'm so happy that Tony now agreed to come over to Lady Landlords. So Tony, thanks for being here today. How are you?
I'm doing great, Becky. Thanks so much for having me. Really enjoyed our conversation on the Rookie podcast. So I appreciate you bringing me on onto your show today.
Of course. So I know everybody's first resource for real estate investing, they head over to Bigger Pockets and Real Estate Rookie. But for the maybe one member in Lady Landlords that does not know your name and is not familiar, would you just kind of take us through a little bit who Tony, the man behind the scenes, is?
Yeah, absolutely. So for those who don't know me, my name is Tony J. Robinson. I have to throw the J in there because I either get confused with Tony Robbins, the personal development guru, or there's actually another real estate investor who's a Black guy whose name is Tony Robinson. And he's also got like a really big platform. So I gotta throw the J in there so people know that it's me. But yeah, so I'm a husband first, family man first. So my wife and my son. Probably the two most important people in my life. So a lot of what I do is to kind of be able to provide for them. Outside of my family life, obviously a real estate investor. So as you mentioned, co-host of the Bigger Pockets Real Estate Rookie podcast. My wife and I have a YouTube channel called The Real Estate Robinsons, where we kind of document our journey of growing our short-term rental portfolio. And then we work with investors through our company called Alpha Geek Capital. And we've pretty much focused primarily in the short-term rental space. I don't know when this will go live, but where are we at right now? We're at 14 active listings in two different markets right now for our short-term rentals. We've got another 6 that'll be live in the next about 6 to 8 weeks or so. And we actually have a hotel under contract that we're converting to a short-term rental. So we just got a lot of different things moving in and grooving right now.
I think that's amazing. I saw about the hotel, so I am going to ask you about that. And there's actually something else that you were working on that just happened that I really want to make sure to hit on as well. But our members are going to have to wait to hear about that one. But what brought you even into this market? What made you even kind of just like wake up one day and be like, "Want to know what I should do? I should go buy a hotel." Where did Tony kind of start with getting involved in real estate investing?
So like most people, my journey kind of started early in my adulthood, probably even earlier actually. So when I was growing up, my dad in his early 30s unexpectedly lost his job. He had been with the same company for 2 decades, something crazy like that. It was a warehouse. Started off as like one of the guys working on the dock, worked his way up to general manager. Him and my mom were doing well. They had 2 homes. And one day he shows up to work. And they tell him that they're going bankrupt and that when he leaves that day, it'll be his last time leaving. So that kind of, had a really big impact on me. I think I was like 3 at the time. And, just a lot of things happened in my family after that as I kind of tried to rebuild their lives. And through my dad's kind of like, I don't know, not a midlife crisis, but, he kind of tried to like rediscover what his career path was going to be. He stumbled into real estate. And he essentially had like a wholesaling business that was set up in Michigan. He was working with investors in California, helping them buy and sell homes in Michigan. And he was doing really well with that. But then the crash happened in 2008 and his whole business kind of collapsed. And what he told me was that, one of his biggest regrets was that instead of wholesaling all those deals, he should have kept some as rentals, because had he done that, even after the collapse happened, he probably still would have been okay. So he always kind of put this bug in my ear. It's like, son, when you get old enough, you want to build passive cash flow, because if you don't, you're going to be like me, where you're dependent on some kind of job that could fire you any day. Or you can make a bunch of money doing these kind of like flipping things. But once that stops, you don't have any more income. So my dad kind of planted that seed for me early. And I was just kind of always entrepreneurial as a kid. I was like the guy in 8th grade that was like selling candy out of his locker to other kids. I had like a tutoring business in college where I was like, I was managing a team of like 3 tutors. So I just always kind of had that entrepreneurial spirit in me. And once I was finally old enough and had enough capital saved up, I decided like, okay, I really want to educate myself. So I was reading books, YouTube University, podcasts, going to meetups, going to conferences, just anything I could to kind of educate myself on how to get started. And once I had enough capital, I dove in. But my goal all along, Becky, was to eventually leave my day job.
Okay.
Like that's what I wanted to do from the beginning. And at the time I had a healthy 6-figure salary. So I knew I was going to need a decent amount of cash flow to be able to do that successfully. So even before I bought my first deal, I knew that my goal was to scale to a relatively big portfolio. And my initial goal was to try and buy apartment complexes. So I went out and I bought Joe Fairless's book. It's called The Best Ever Apartment Syndication Book or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And one of his like focuses or one of the things he said was you need a platform first. If you want to be a good syndicator, people need to know you, like you, and trust you. And the best way to do that is to build a platform. So before I even got my first deal, Becky, I had started a podcast about real estate investing. So I got my first deal in October of 2019. And I think I started the podcast about 2 months before that. So anyway, I ended up doing this podcast. I started buying real estate, and I started off buying some single family houses in Shreveport, Louisiana. That led me to short-term rentals. And now I am where I am today.
The thing that I most identified within your story there was about your father, unfortunately, losing his job because the company went bankrupt.
Yeah.
That stuck in my mind for two reasons. One, because your father had no control over that situation. He was not in control of where his actual income was coming from, right? It was the people within that company that were making those decisions. But that story also reminded me of what so many of us went through over this past 2 years during the pandemic. A lot of people went to work. All of a sudden we're being told, no, we're going to just send you home. Here in New York, we were supposed to be quarantining for 2 weeks, which then turned into 2 months, which then turned into 6 months. And a lot of people that had that income coming in and that felt like they had the most secure jobs, all of a sudden that was just gone overnight. Do you feel that a lot of other people probably moved to real estate investing or looking for these other income streams based on kind of this similar story of realizing the jobs our companies don't really care about us as much as we feel that they should?
Becky, it happened to me. So this is the crazy part. On December 23rd, 2020, again, I was a senior manager at a big company, and I get a call 2 days before Christmas that I'm no longer employed. I lost my job 2 days before Christmas. And my goal was always to leave that job anyway, but I had like a 3 to 5 year plan, right? And they kind of expedited that for me. So I was so lucky that we had already kind of started building this real estate business and that we had kind of enough momentum where I could see the light at the end of the tunnel. So I decided to go full time into our real estate business after that happened. But yeah, it was such I already knew that in the back of my mind, but it was such I don't know, like, what's the word that I'm thinking? It like solidified those thoughts that I had about what it meant to be an employee, that it didn't matter that I gave 4 years of my life to this one company. It didn't matter that I woke up early, I stayed there late, like all the work that I put into it. At the end of the day, I'm just a cog in a machine. And at any moment, right, like people, after I got let go from my job, I had my old coworkers reaching out to me saying, Tony, we're going to miss you, this, that, and the other. But the next day, their lives went on like normal. The company went on like normal. Like I was that insignificant to that organization. So that was a big lesson for me as well, that if you really want to have an impact and you really want to be in control, it's got to be something that you own.
Correct. And that actually makes me think of then what you're saying about running that tutoring business. At first, when you mentioned, hey, I was tutoring when I was in college. Most people are going to think about that as I will then trade time for money and I then will be tutor. I will make money from that time. But then you said a second sentence, which was that you were managing 2 or 3 other tutors. Right. So what I love about that is you actually found a way to create that extra income streams and really multiply. You're not really trading that time for money. That's what your employees were doing. They were actually doing the tutoring, but you then were able to really set up more of that organization. Exactly. I think that was really great foresight that you had on that.
And it was a very small amount that I was making off each tutor. It was like, I don't know, like $10 every time they went out and trained somebody. But it was like the best $10 I'd ever made, because it's like I was here at my, at home, and here's some money coming in that I didn't necessarily have to be out there working for.
Which then kind of translates into now buying properties. And same thing, we get that cash flow coming in from all the different places. So you mentioned that you had started with single family homes down in Shreveport, and then that led you to the short-term rental market. Can you talk a little bit about how that translated?
So again, my initial goal when I started investing in real estate was to get a big portfolio. And I thought to myself that buying apartment complexes was going to be the best way to do that, right? Instead of buying one unit at a time, let me go out and buy 300 or 400 or whatever that number is. But as at the time I was, in my late 20s, had never done a real estate deal before, I figured it was going to be kind of hard to get, to convince people that I was worthy of their investment and their trust to kind of buy these apartment complexes. So I said, okay, let me start small. Let me kind of, learn how to be a real estate investor before I go out and try and buy something so big. So I started off, even though I started off in the single family space, I always had the plan of graduating to something bigger. So we bought a few houses. We did like some, long distance burrs, and we were making very little money on each property, like, $100 and $150 per door. And after we had done about 4 of those, we said, okay, cool. We got 4. Let's try and go out and do this apartment syndication thing. And this is actually right at the beginning of 2020, and right when COVID hit. And it was just like not a good time, I think, to try and break into like the world of apartment syndication. Like deals were falling apart left and right. Buyers were backing out of deals, sellers were putting properties off of the market. So we just had a really difficult time finding deals that made sense from an apartment syndication standpoint. And we had a hard time like raising the funds because a lot of people were nervous because there's this global pandemic and no one knows what's happening. You guys have never done this before. Why would we trust you? So there was just a lot of headwinds we were facing as we tried to transition into the apartment syndication space. And lo and behold, I had a friend. His name is Alex Sabio. This guy changed my life.
I know Alex.
Alex is a great guy, right? And he's converted a lot of people into the short-term rental space. So he was actually one of my partners when we initially tried to buy an apartment syndication. And after we kind of had all these false starts, he told me like, hey, I think I'm gonna go buy this short-term rental in Tennessee instead. And I was like, Tennessee? Like, what the heck is going on in Tennessee? Like, I'd never even heard of the Smoky Mountains or Pigeon Forge or Gatlinburg. So he ends up buying a cabin, kind of shows us the numbers. And me and my other partner, we say, okay, cool. We have this capital that we haven't put to work in the apartment syndication space. Let's go try and buy this cabin and see if we can do the short-term rental thing. So we end up buying that first property. We closed on it in August of 2020, so like smack dab in the middle of the pandemic. And it was kind of risky, but it ended up being one of the best deals that we've ever purchased. And it was that one property that kind of really got us hooked on the idea of short-term rentals, and we kind of went on a rampage after that, trying to buy as many as we could.
That's interesting that you closed on that property in August 2020. When I was on the Real Estate Rookie podcast, one of the stories that we had highlighted was my purchase of a property that closed in September of 2020. Then I called it really my COVID baby. And it was the same thing that everybody just thought I was crazy. We still did not know what was going on with the pandemic. We were really in like the thick of it. And I said the exact same thing that you did, that it was really one of my best producing properties from buying it like at that time.
Totally. My biggest regret is not buying like 8 that year. Like if I could have bought, like if I knew then what I know now, I would have went bankrupt trying to buy as many properties as I could have, because I would have gained so much wealth over the next, 18 to 24 month period.
So I don't know if you would have been in the same situation as me. I probably would have ended up divorced. I think my husband was already thought I was crazy enough to buy the first one. I don't know if you would have let me be like, great, babe, we were putting it all on black here, but
right.
But that would have turned out interesting. But I agree. They do kind of say that a lot of wealth is really kind of created out of tough situations, right? So all of a sudden, when everybody's kind of going left, being like, great, we need to save, we don't really know what's going on, things are unpredictable, that's really kind of the opportunity to take some of those risks. And to those that take risks tend to reap the rewards. And I feel like that's probably why the two of us ended up with properties that have just functioned so great and moved you then into really a different market. So now you end up with this short-term rental down in Tennessee. I would have said the exact same question. I would have been like, what's going on in Tennessee? But I know you ended up you have a lot of short-term rentals in other places across the US. How did you then expand from that one short-term rental in Tennessee to the more that you have now also on the West Coast?
Yeah. So what we saw in Tennessee was there was a national park that drew in a pretty consistent year-round like draw of travelers. and price points were relatively low in comparison to the kind of returns you could get. So we said, okay,
Mhm.
what other markets can we find that have some of those similar characteristics? I live in California. We're about an hour and a half away from Joshua Tree, California, which houses the 10th most visited national park in the United States.
Yeah.
And the prices at that time in Joshua Tree were significantly lower than Tennessee. So we said, hey, we think we can get even better returns in this market. So that's what we did. We went into that market. We got, I think, 10 properties in that city now. So we just kind of went head first into trying to find a market that had similar characteristics to what we had in Tennessee.
I think that was really interesting. When I saw just you kept buying a Joshua Tree, I
Mhm.
was always like very interested in that. I'm actually surprised to hear that the price points there were actually lower than what you were seeing in Tennessee. So
Yeah.
here's another place that you and I have a similarity. So a lot of our Lady Landlords listeners know that I used to live in Europe for a long time where I ran a tour company. And one
Mhm.
thing that I ended up doing was I used to have a bus that I took people on to be able to bring them between those different cities, between Spain and
Mhm.
Portugal, on my tours. Now, you have a bus. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing with this bus trip? I thought this was so cool, but
Yeah.
I would love for you to share that with our listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. So, part of what we enjoy doing is teaching others about how they can get started in the world of short-term rental investing. And we thought, like, man, wouldn't it be a cool idea to kind of drive everyone around this market that we've built this business in, so they can meet our team members that we work with, they can see our properties in person, they can see the operations in person.
Mhm.
So we started the Real Estate Robinson short-term rental ride-along event. So essentially, we get people from all over the country. They fly in to Southern California. We get a big charter bus. We drive from my hometown out to Joshua Tree, spend the entire day like touring our properties, meeting our cleaners, meeting our lenders, meeting our just the whole crew that we have to kind of make that machine run. We drive them back home, and they all fly back. So we're pretty much sold out of our next event. But if anyone's interested, you can go to strridealong.com, and you guys can sign up for the next one.
Perfect. I'll make sure to link that down in the show notes as well, if anyone's
Awesome.
interested. I thought that was just such a great idea. And I think it really makes a difference when we could talk about all these things on a podcast, a YouTube
Right.
channel. I could post all day on social media about like a property I buy, but to actually show people that it's real, that it exists, that it's a tangible type thing, I think is really, really important.
Yeah.
Now, do you have any long-term rentals or is everything now short-term?
We sold all of our long-term rentals. So everything in our
Okay.
portfolio right now is short-term. And honestly, for the next maybe 3 years or so, that'll probably be our only focus. We have some goals, and I think once we hit those, we'll transition into buying some more, maybe long-term, maybe we'll go into storage or some other asset class. But for right now, the goal for the next several years is just to continue to focus on building our short-term rental portfolio.
I have to ask why? Why 3 years focusing on short-term rentals?
So, like most people that are entrepreneurial, we're all, I think, subject to the shiny object syndrome. And every time that we see someone making money or doing something cool, we're like, let me go try that out. And that was me through my early 20s. I tried so many different crazy business ideas in my 20s, and pretty much none of them worked out to be financial successes. But I think part of the reason was that I never dedicated myself enough to become a true expert in that one thing. Right? I'd do something for a couple of months and let it go, and do something else for a couple of months and let it go. So when I made the decision to invest in short-term rentals, I consciously told myself that I didn't want to fall subject to the shiny object syndrome, and I really
Mhm.
wanted to become an expert in this one thing. So I said, Tony, if you're going to buy this, commit to doing just this one thing for at least the next 5 years. So it's just a decision that I made to really narrow in on one niche of real estate investing.
I think that's important. You're right. I think with just the world of social media as well, in a ton of other things, not just real estate investing, we get very caught up in what other people are doing, right? And it's very much, well, this person's having success here. I guess I should just go try that. And sometimes we end up sacrificing what was really important to us. I
Mhm.
see sometimes a lot of our members seeing somebody's success in a certain strategy, right? Maybe someone is really killing it in wholesaling. And then all of a sudden we see a ton of people that are starting wholesaling businesses when maybe that isn't necessarily the best real estate investing strategy for that specific person. Maybe time is not
Mhm.
exactly on my side. Maybe cold calling isn't necessarily my thing. Wholesaling is going to be a little bit more difficult for me, but it's hard for us to kind of stay on track with what we're looking for. So I'm really happy to see that you're saying this is where my focus is going to be, and I want to be an expert in that. I tell a lot of our mentees within Lady Landlords to kind of keep your ears open. It's okay to kind of listen to like what other people are doing, but kind of keep your eyes closed. Focus on just the one thing that's really the strategy for you. Don't get distracted by all the noise kind of around you. It sounds like that's what you've done.
Yeah, and one thing to add on to that is that like when you choose one thing and you go really deep on it, you start to see all the different opportunities that are in there. So let me explain what I mean by that. So we said short-term rentals is our thing. Like that's what we're going to focus on. But as we started to like run into issues finding good deal flow, it's forced us to do things that are kind of tangential to short-term rentals and kind of fall in some of the other like real estate investing types. So for example, initially we were buying everything on market. Now what we've had to do is the market is kind of tightened up is find more rehab properties. So now we're fixing and flipping properties as well, but we're selling them off as short-term rentals. So we'll keep some for ourselves and we'll sell other ones as fully furnished, ready to go Airbnb. So we are flipping, but it's within the umbrella of short-term rentals. Finding good deal flow, right? So we can't find everything that we need on market. So we go to wholesalers. We also have direct mail that we're working on or like cold calling that we're working on. So we're kind of doing some of the activities of wholesaling, but it's with the focus of finding deals for ourselves. So there's these different aspects of real estate investing that still come into it, but it's all with the focus of short-term rentals. And we're also starting to identify that there are other kind of related businesses that we can launch as well. So by the end of the year, we plan to have a short-term rental cleaning company that's accepting like third party or, properties that aren't just ours, and then a short-term rental property management company. So it's like just by focusing on this one thing, we're able to like turn over all these other stones that we may not have done had we kind of just gone in all these different directions.
Exactly. Once you get that shiny object syndrome where you'd be like, okay, great, let's do this one little thing here, this one little thing here, but you're really kind of creating that cohesive business. It kind of reminds me of like McDonald's, right? Not only do they serve you your food, but they actually have the farms to raise the chickens, right? Like they do that whole integration within their business, right? So you can have your own short-term rental monopoly.
Exactly. And
over
that's the
there.
goal. Let me
Really be
add
the
one more
one-stop shop.
Yeah, let me add one more thing on top of that too, Becky. So I think one thing, and I'm not sure the experience level of the folks in your community, but I know something that a lot of new investors struggle with is they kind of get into this information overload, right? Where it's like they want to learn something and they find themselves consuming content on so many different topics. Today I'm learning about cold calling. Tomorrow I'm learning about door knocking. Then I'm looking at learning about how to put together a scope of work. And over here it's this due diligence, and like there's all these different things you can start learning about. But the approach that I always try and take is to use what's called just-in-time learning. So just-in-time learning is saying, I have a goal of getting my first investment property in the next 90 days. So I'm only going, and that investment property is specifically a long-term rental in the city of Springfield, Missouri, like whatever it is, right? So all of the content that I should be consuming should only be about how to find a property in Springfield, Missouri. Maybe I'm not even going to consume any content about property management. I'm not going to consume any content about whatever it is. Like I just want to know, how do I find a deal? So I'm going to listen to every single podcast I can about deal finding, about negotiating with sellers, about this, about that. Once I get under contract, then I can start looking for stuff about, okay, how do I manage the rehab? How do I find the right team? How do I do all these other things? But I think people get so focused on trying to learn everything at one time, they overload themselves. And if we could just take one step back, say, what is the next step I need to focus on, and then only consume content about that one thing.
I think that's a great idea. There was actually just a study that I was reading that talked about how with multitasking is really kind of like old news, right? We really want to be able to say, this is the task I'm focusing on 100%. And that people are actually more productive and more successful when they take just one step at a time. So it sounds very similar to what you're doing. So I think that's great advice for our listeners. Thank you.
Yeah.
So now we have no more long-term rentals. We are 100% committed to those short-term rentals. Can you share some of the benefits and kind of sell our listeners on why short-term rentals are a way to go over long-term rentals?
So I'll caveat it by saying this is that short-term rentals are definitely not for everyone. Okay. Correct. In my mind, there are three things you need to be a successful short-term rental operator. You need the time, you need the ability, and most importantly, you need the desire. Right. So short-term rentals are inherently more time consuming than long-term rentals, right? It's not one tenant that's in there for 12 to 18 months. It's our properties turn on average every 2 to 3 days. So that means every 2 to 3 days, we have someone else coming in that has a different set of needs, desires, communication styles. Some are super communicative. Others don't talk to you at all. Some are going to break a lot of things. Some will leave your place pristine. But either way, there's a heavy workload associated with managing short-term rentals, especially at scale. So first, you have to have the time to be able to kind of respond to those guest needs and manage those kind of short-term rental obstacles in a timely fashion. Second, you need the ability. You need the ability to operate and present yourself as like the front desk of a hotel, right? You need to be able to give good customer service. You need to know how to use the software that's associated with short-term rentals. You need to know how to price your property appropriately. You need to learn how to manage your vendors, which are your cleaners, your handyman. So there's a lot that goes into it. If you're not a people person, then maybe you don't have the ability to do this, right? And then the last thing you need is the desire. So even if you have the time, even if you have the ability, if you just hate doing all those things, even if you're good at it, then short-term rentals won't be a good fit for you. So those are the 3 things you need first. So I know you said to sell people on why they should do short-term rentals, but I wanted to touch on the things they should be aware of first, okay? Now, in terms of why we love short-term rentals and why I think most people should as well, I can say it with one number, and that's 138. 138 was the cash on cash return that we got for our very first short-term rental. So we bought this property. Our total cash investment was $65,000. $65,000 what we put into it. We netted just over $80,000 in that first month. Not gross. We actually netted, like after all expenses, just over $80,000 in the property. And it turned out to be a 138% return. I don't know anyone who can generate $80,000 in profit on a single family residence as a long-term rental. Right? Like it would have to be an insane property, right? To be able to net.
Your cost would be a lot higher.
Exactly. Right. So I think that's the biggest thing for me is that you get bigger returns with short-term rentals than you do with long-term. Now, obviously there is more risk there, right? You have more people coming in and out, potential damage to the property, regulations, things like that. So it is a more hands-on business. But if your focus is to build up the highest amount of cash flow in the shortest period of time, I think short-term rentals is the best way to go. And I think they give you the best risk-adjusted returns outside of everything else that you can invest in right now in real estate.
Gotcha. That helps. And once again, this is more, I really wanted our members to understand what are really kind of those positive sides, because then my next question was going to be, what do you find to be the biggest difficulties within the short-term rental market?
So the biggest one, I mean, there's a lot. I already kind of talked about like the guest management side, right? So you have to be able to deal with people and, you know, their varying levels of need and be able to respond to them in a professional kind of hospitality driven way, which can be a challenge sometimes. Like, for example, we had someone that booked our property, one of our properties, and he booked, I don't know, like 2 months ago. And for whatever reason, he went back to our listing to look at the calendar, and he saw that the days after his booking were cheaper than what he paid. And he messaged us back saying, "You guys are crooks. I can't believe you charge me more than what people are paying right now. I want a refund." And it's just like, you know, you have to deal with those kind of guests, right? So I think that's one big downside, is that you're going to interact with some people that are less than ideal to work with. The other big downside is that, or not downside, but the other challenge or thing you have to really get good at is finding the right team. Unless you plan to clean your property yourself or deal with all the maintenance and repair issues yourself, you're going to need a team of people in that market to do that for you. And that's been a challenge for us in some of our markets, is finding the right people to kind of lead that charge, especially as, you know, we've scaled pretty quickly. So having the team that can kind of keep up with this growth has been a challenge as well. So I think if you can nail that piece of finding the right team, it makes your job as the owner, you know, significantly easier.
Now, what have you done in the past to look for those right team members? And I know, once again, I love the idea that you've kind of said that this has been kind of difficult to do. So you know what? I'm just going to build my own company to have those right team members there. I love that. If it doesn't exist, create it. But what strategies and recommendations do you have for our listeners about how to find those right people for their teams?
The best way is referrals. If you can talk to a short-term rental owner in the market you're looking to invest in that is willing to share their team members and they can vouch for them, that's usually how you'll find the best people. But not every person is going to be willing to do that. Like if you ask me who my crew was, I'm not going to tell you, right?
Yeah.
Because they're that critical to the success of my business, and they don't have the bandwidth to barely keep up with our property, so they wouldn't be able to take on more. But if you can find a cleaner who can come recommend it from another operator, I think that's the best way. So we found our first cleaner in Tennessee that way, and she's been a rock star. She's the only the cleaner that we haven't had to fire, and she's been with us since the very beginning. But if you can't find her through referrals, most big vacation rental markets have some kind of Facebook group that's dedicated to short-term rentals. You can get in there, in the search bar, type cleaner, and usually there'll be like a slew of posts of people that have tried to promote or share their cleaners, and that's how we found a couple cleaners for ours in Joshua Tree. The other recommended method you can use is if it's again, this works really well in like big vacation destinations, but ask your realtor. So our realtor has given us some recommendations on cleaners as well, because if they bought and sold a lot of these short-term rentals, they start to know some of the people and they can kind of point you in the right direction. So Facebook group and realtors, I say, are the two probably biggest ways to make it happen. And if you want to get really like, stealthy and sneaky about it, I've seen other operators do this where they'll like say that you're buying something in New York, right? And you're having a hard time finding a cleaner. Just book a night at someone else's Airbnb and then wait for the cleaner to show up and say, hey, if you're looking for more work, like let me know. So those are some ways that I've seen some people find success with building that team out.
When you started to say like, hey, here's like a stealthy way to kind of do that, I was actually thinking he's going to say that people book nights to figure out who the cleaners are. So that actually happens. That is like cutthroat, I will say. That is very cutthroat. All right.
Yeah.
And once again, I love the idea of looking for those referrals, not only talking to other people that are successful in that market, asking your realtor or other real estate professionals, using your Facebook groups. Honestly, those would be some of the same recommendations that we can also have if you're looking for team members, even within long-term rentals. It's really a good idea for kind of almost anything that you're looking for in life to always start with the people that you know, who they're using, who are they talking to. Those are also the people that you kind of want to at least start with, rather than just going to Google, or, I don't even know if phone books even exist anymore. I don't know if the yellow pages is a thing, but you might want to, but at least start with somebody that's used that person that can tell you a little bit about that person. So, so that makes me happy. Also, you had mentioned one of the things that's important to be successful within short-term rental markets was being comfortable using certain software systems. Are there can you share a little bit about the systems that you use that you found to be successful?
Yeah, there's three key pieces of software that every short-term rental operator should be using. So the first is a dynamic pricing tool. The second is your property management software. And the third is your digital guidebook. Your dynamic pricing tool. So like, for example, we've all booked like an airline ticket or a hotel for a certain night. And if you go to any of these websites to book, you'll notice most of the time there's varying prices depending on what day of the week, what week of the month, what month of the year you're looking to book. Like I've never seen an airline that charges one flat rate across the entire year for their flight, right? You could go back literally 5 minutes later on a different computer and you're going to see two different prices.
Just like the person that booked your Airbnb that then kind of complained, oh, but the next night was a different price. Well, of course it is. It sounds like that's a very good example of what you're talking about here, right?
That's exactly what I'm talking about. So the dynamic pricing tool allows you to kind of set up the framework of how you want to charge your guests. And then it does all the calculations to spit out, okay, here's what you should charge for this day. Here's what you should charge for this day. So I think one of the biggest mistakes that a new short-term rental operator can make is having static pricing throughout the entire year, because you're either going to be charging too much and your occupancy and revenue will be too low because people aren't booking, or you're going to charge too little. Maybe you'll be filled up, but you could have charged more and maximized your revenue. So the dynamic pricing tool is key. The second is your property management software. A lot of what we do in our short-term rental business is automated. So like our cleaners, they automatically know whenever there's a new booking, an alteration to a booking, or a canceled booking, and they can log in and see what days they need to clean the property. We don't have to communicate that with them. Anytime that someone books one of our properties, they're automatically entered into a 7 series sequence of messages that help them, they confirm their booking, they check in with them during their stay, they give them check-in instructions, check-out instructions, and everything they need while they're at the property. All of our keyless entry codes are automatically generated. So there's a lot of things that your property management software can do to reduce the workload that's needed for you as a property manager. So there's your dynamic pricing tool, there's your property management software, and the third thing we like to use is your digital guidebook. So when someone comes to one of our properties, they get a link to a digital guidebook, and it gives them a lot of the information about the house. So if someone's asking like, I don't know, like, hey, how do I, like, what's something that people always ask? Like, hey, how do I use the hot tub, right? Like, what are the, how do I get the cover off and do all these things? We have a video on there for that. Some of our properties are in locations that are difficult to find. Like GPS doesn't take you to the right spot. So we have a video on there that says, hey, do not follow your GPS. And we literally drive down the road and say, do you see this sign right here? Make a left at this sign and then come up this hill and you'll find the property. So a lot of those kind of frequently asked questions we try to answer before the guest even asks them by putting them into the digital guidebook. And it's a really kind of visually expressive way to answer those questions. So those are the three pieces of software that we use in our business.
After that digital guidebook, what percentage of people still reach out to you saying, hey, my GPS took me somewhere else I can't find?
All the time. And then we just link back to the guidebook and we say, hey, we actually answered this already. Click this link and you'll see the answer.
So I forget it was on a podcast or book that I was reading that talked about how long-term rentals are really the market of brick and mortar locations. I am giving you a place where there are four walls. Short-term rentals are more being in the hospitality business rather than just providing space. Do you feel that statement is accurate or false?
I 100% agree with that statement. And like, I'll share like a more practical reason of how that plays out. I know some investors who say you should never buy a short-term rental unless it also makes sense as a long-term rental, right? I've heard a lot of people say that, and I disagree with that notion, because if you ask Hilton, when you buy a hotel, do you only buy a hotel if it also works as an apartment complex? And they're going to say, no, we buy hotels with the pure purpose of being a place that people can vacation, right? Or, come for a short stay. And in my mind, that's the same way that we approach our short-term rental business. So we very much look at it as we have 14 small hotels that we own and operate.
I actually love that. I love that analogy because I feel like you hear that statement all the time, and you're right. And it goes back to also what you're saying of you're going to focus on short-term rentals. That is where you are putting all of your energy. That's what you're going to make sure to be learning to your best ability. That is what your focus is. So it would be really dividing your energies. If you then said, well, I also have to make sure that I know everything about the long-term rental market in case we kind of switch to that, right? Because I need to make sure it works as a long-term rental, not just as a short-term rental. So you're right. That is your business. We don't need to know how it would work if it was a different business because we're not in that market. Totally. So on that note, then I do have to ask, here we are now in almost the middle of 2022. What are your predictions, if you could have a crystal ball in front of you, of what that short-term rental market is going to look like?
I think we're still in the very early phases of the short-term rental kind of explosion that we've seen. Airbnb put out some messaging last year saying that they needed 1 million more hosts globally to support the demand that they're seeing. And I believe that, right? Like they just did their quarterly earnings call and bookings were up year over year, some tremendous percentage, right? Like everyone thought that, 2021, like after the kind of lockdowns died down, that would be the end of the short-term rental boom, but we're still seeing an increase in people opting to have short-term rentals as opposed to the traditional hotel stay. So my big goal, Becky, and what we're hoping to achieve at Alpha Geek Capital is over the next 10 years, we want to get to $1 billion worth of short-term rentals. And our hope is that 10 years from now, so let me take a step back actually. So if you think about almost every other asset class in real estate investing, single family houses, apartment complexes, self-storage, industrial, there is an institutional investment happening in every one of those asset classes. So these big hedge funds that have billions of dollars are going out, they're buying up big portfolios of single family residences for long-term rentals. They're buying up self-storage, they're buying up apartment complexes. We have not yet seen that same level of involvement from institutional investors in the short-term rental space. So it's coming, right? Like anytime there's an opportunity to make money, you know that the hedge funds and the institutions will come there, but they haven't quite figured it out yet. So my ultimate goal is that if we can get to $1 billion over the next 10 years, when all these different big hedge funds come in, they're looking for these portfolios to buy, I can raise my hand and say, hey, Tony, nice to meet you, here you go. And we can kind of ride off into the sunset from there. So that's what I see. I think we're still at the very beginning phases. I think there's still a big opportunity to get healthy returns, and there's still a lot of opportunity for folks.
Perfect. I love hearing your viewpoint on that. Now, what if I've been listening to this and I'm like, great, this sounds like the right market to go into. We're at this early end of this explosion for this. There's great returns that I can actually get there. But man, Tony, that sounds like a ton of work. I don't live in that location. I want to own in this vacation spot. I'm not nowhere near it. What can somebody do in that situation to be able to still own to own short-term rentals from a long distance?
So we manage ours remotely, all of ours. Our first one was over 2,000 miles away from our house. Even the ones that are in Joshua Tree, we're about 90 minutes from there. Even those ones, we don't really go into the ones we own out there all that often either. So it is very much possible to remotely manage short-term rentals. You just need to have the right people in place. So having a good cleaner and a good handyman are the two key components. But again, like I said before, you still need the time, desire, and ability to manage those people and manage remotely. So if someone likes the idea of investing in short-term rentals, but hates the idea of actually managing them, then you have to find some kind of property manager or maybe a partner that can do that management piece for you.
Right. It's kind of the idea. It's the same difference on if you are kind of across the street from your property, but yet you still don't want to manage it either. Then you have to find a solution of the person that can really kind of take control of that there. Totally. So, which once again, there are complete possibilities and a lot of different ways to be able to do that. But I love the fact that even if I own a property actually that's across the street from where I currently live, right? In my own house, I actually own the house literally across the street in a parking lot there. And that's something that it's really great that I can still treat that property across the street and run it remotely just as much as I'm going to run my properties that are in the Dominican Republic, because there's no need for me necessarily to be on site. I don't want to. I want to make sure that I can spend the least amount of time managing my properties for the most amount of cash flow. So I'm glad that you would do that exactly in the same sense with short-term rentals. Now, do you have any short-term rental disaster stories? Anything that just with a guest, a property that just went like completely wrong on you?
So we have properties in Joshua Tree, California, and prior to this kind of short-term rental boom, Joshua Tree was mostly like a lower income kind of community. There were still people that had vacation homes out there, but the large majority of people that resided there, the majority were below the median income for like the county that the city's in. So needless to say, there are some people that are addicted to drugs and kind of do all kinds of other crazy things. So at one of our properties, we had a guest that was supposed to check out. They weren't checking out. Our cleaner showed up that said, hey, we're trying to come, but like all the blinds are closed. We're knocking on the door. No one's answering. So we ended up calling the guests, and they're not picking up. And then we call again. They finally pick up. By this time, it's like an hour past their checkout. And just as soon as they picked up, we knew something was off. Like the way that they were talking was just like very kind of off, very jittery. And we were like, you need to get out or we're going to call the police. And once you mentioned police, they like skirted out the property really quickly. But when our cleaners went in, they didn't damage anything, but they left a complete mess. And they used up like all the toilet paper that we had. All the towels were all over the place. We found drugs, we found needles, we found all kinds of crazy things on the property. So we knew who that person was through their profile, right? And we blocked them from ever being able to book one of our properties again. So fast forward a couple of months, we have a guest that checks in. So we have instant book on. So anyone can book our properties. We don't do like any screening. And the vast majority of our guests are really good. But we had a guest that booked a different property. And the guest calls. The check-in time is at 4:00. They called us at 6 p.m. and they were asking, hey, can we get some more towels? Can we get some more toilet paper? And we're like, that's weird. It's only supposed to be 2 people. You checked in at 4. You've already used all the consumables that we gave you that should last for like 3 days. So immediately we're like, something's weird here. And I was the one to talk to the girl. So I called her and I said, hey, is everything okay? And as soon as I picked up the phone, I was like, okay, this is the same person. So we ended up having to call the sheriffs and them again. And they ended up leaving within, I don't know, like 45 minutes after they left. Luckily, since we caught it so early, the amount of like mess they left wasn't nearly as bad as the first time because they were there for like 3 days. But that's probably been like the worst experience that we've had. We've literally had to call the cops on them twice to try and get them to vacate the property.
And that doesn't sound like it's that horrible. Like, okay, like it sounds like you were able to like really handle that. Clearly inconvenient, clearly not what you want to deal with, and just sad from, all around. But okay, that ain't so bad as some other horror stories that.
So we haven't had any like major ragers where we come in like the whole place is trash and broken and stuff like that. So we're lucky that it's just been that one couple. And what's crazy is that they do this like repeatedly. So there's like a Facebook group out there in Joshua Tree, and the same couple just keeps creating fake profiles, jumping from property to property to who God knows why. But that's probably been our worst experience so far.
Wow. All right. Well, I'm glad in all of respects, then it sounds like you've been very fortunate so far. So I hope that continues with you. I just have one last question that I have for you about the short-term rental markets. If we have one of our listeners out there that is really wanting to get into the short-term rental market, but is just afraid to do so, or not really sure what the best step is to kind of get started in that, what advice would you have for that listener?
I think education and network are two of the biggest ingredients anyone can have to feel confident to move forward, right? Education gives you the foundation, and then network shows you that it's possible. So if you're afraid of short-term rentals, but you have a group of 5, 10, 20 people that that are all having success doing it, then your perception of what's possible dramatically changes. So for me, educate yourself, find other people that are having success in short-term rentals, and that should give you the confidence you need to move forward.
Thank you. And if we have any of our members then that are looking for some of the education on short-term rentals, definitely check out Tony's bus tour and make sure to get on the wait list for the next time they're doing that. Once again, I'll link down in the show notes, but it's strridealong.com. So that's a great place that you'll be able to get that education that you need to take steps forward. Tony, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate you taking the time out.
Yeah, Becky, thank you so much for having me. I hope your listeners got some value from hearing my story, and I'm looking forward to doing this again soon with you.
Yes, we'll definitely plan something. Otherwise, to our members out there today, thank you very much for listening to this week's episode of the Lady Landlords Podcast. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube and also wherever you listen to podcasts as we release a new episode every single Tuesday. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next week for the Lady Landlords Podcast. Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you're feeling stuck in your real estate journey, visit lady-landlords.com/roadmap to book a one-on-one workshop with me. I'll help you determine your next best strategy. Or you could subscribe to our newsletter for exclusive tips and offers. Invest with confidence. Become a lady landlord today.